Yeah, two. Can everyone hear me all right? Do I need this to do the live? Do you need that?
I think we need that.
Gonna need that?
On the screen.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'll try and do that. Need 3 hands. Okay, I just thought I'd come along today and share a little bit of the insight into the journey that I've taken from when I started working in 1992, which was a different millennium ago, and what the creative industries looked like in those days. And when I told my mother, having finished a university degree, that I was going to go and work for a strange small little company called Games Workshop, she thought I was mad and I should have gone and got a real job. And, you know, how the world has changed. So hopefully some insights. I'll keep it brief. And then at the end, if anyone's interested, we can have some Q&A into the games design. I could talk about The Walking Dead, probably brought that along because it might be an IP that all of you are familiar with in some case or to some extent. And we've got Hellboy there, which is some of the licensed products we've picked up. And we can talk you through some of the design decisions we've made. But I thought to start off, let's take a walk on the wild side. So we're going back to 1992. I've just got a history degree from a very respectable university, and what I should have done now is gone and been a bank manager or an estate agent or something sensible. And instead, I thought I'd go and join this crazy little company called Games Workshop. And you know, that's the corporate life. Well, it was as corporate as I was ever going to get. Of course, you guys and ladies are now going to be joining a world where some of the biggest companies in the world are exactly the industry you worked in. When we joined in 1992, if you said you were working in computer games, people thought you were a mad one. So corporate life, you know, you'll actually be able to walk out there with all the challenges that come with working for big companies. So then you think, no, you know what, corporate life's not for me. Let's go and be an entrepreneur. Let's go and work for a small company, and you know we could become the next Mark Zuckerberg, or actually maybe being an entrepreneur is something a bit more like, you know, hey, all this. What is wonderful and what is fantastic about what's going on in the world, and you know, there's so many opportunities now, and I think the ability to follow your passion, whether it's games design or sculpting or graphic design or music, the opportunities for those are far more organised and straightforward, and then you're going to have to fire from the back, I think. I've lost control. I discovered these little plastic toy soldiers. Who knows Games Workshop? Who's played with Warhammer or Warhammer 40,000? 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, we're creeping up. So, well then, you all get a zombie for being the right kind of people who love. You're not having one, you're too old. Oh. Go on, you can have one as well. So, this was just starting out. This is in the mid-1980s. Everything was black and white. Toy soldiers are things you got beaten up for playing with in the playground. And like I said, I went off to university and I thought, wow, this is good fun. This is exciting. In those days, having a job that you enjoyed was banned. You weren't allowed to do those type of things. You had to have a job, and then you could have your hobby in your attic in the privacy of your own home on Tuesday evenings. You have to fire me from the back, guys. I've lost control of my clicker. So we joined Games Workshop. The turnover was £6 million. I think they do that every day now. I worked in the sales. I worked in territory management, marketing, the studio. Now, they very kindly paid for me to travel around the world, which was very nice of them. So I've been to some fantastic countries and seen interesting things, all while selling toy soldiers. There we go, look at this. And by the end, the company had grown to 120 million, all down to me, obviously. I'd been promoted to running and looking after the new products and the marketing. And that's because I was kind of had a hobby brain, but also was trying to bring some commerciality to what was a growing company. I'd also got married and had 3 children. Gone and done an MBA, which was very corporate. As the company was getting bigger, I realized the only experience I had was Games Workshop the day before. I didn't know anything else. I've been working by this point for 10, 12, 13 years. Some of the grey hair had started, which obviously the Just for Men has sorted out, so that's gone. That's not a problem anymore. And then I decided it was time to leave. Interestingly, what I'd thoroughly enjoyed about in the early stages, the creativity, the growth, the constant change, it had started to become a corporate structure. It started to get very, very good at what it was doing, but you were starting to do a piece each. And I think that's one of the big challenges and questions you might want to ask yourself as you go through your career. Do you like change? Do you like doing different things, applying your skills but to different challenges? Or actually turning up and getting better at specifics and developing your skills in a special area can decide about what size company you might want to work for or which route you want to go down. So yeah, I stood on the edge and jumped. I left the security of corporate life. I wasn't very good at the politics. I wasn't very good at making myself look good. I like to just sell toy soldiers. So I knew I enjoyed creativity. I enjoyed different challenges. I enjoyed every day being different. And therefore, by the end, corporate life didn't quite fit with what I needed. So I went out and asked people to give me some money, which they foolishly did. And I decided I was going to go and do these. Very creative. I'd played with them all of my life. It's kind of what I knew. And one of the things, and this is where your basic idea, if you want to start doing something, is you need to take something that you're passionate about, that you care about, that you understand. And the big thing is Games Workshop, if you remember, had done some, do you remember the Lord of the Rings movies, the Fellowship of the Rings? And they'd taken a license for those, and they'd done these games with miniatures. The sales went crazy. And then when the movies ended, their sales came back to what they'd always been. And the decision at Games Workshop in those days, and very rightly when they've got 300 stores and 2,000 staff, was we don't do licenses because miniatures and licenses don't work. And actually they've got their own licenses, 40K and Warhammer, and they're now selling those left, right and centre. And I thought, well, you know what? I think licenses and miniatures do work, but they work when you don't have PLC owners. They work when you don't have 300 stores and you've got to make sure that all your staff are paid every month. So if we can come along, get hold of a cool license and make a cool game, I think people would love to do that. And it would appeal to a bigger audience than just the grimdark of the far future. So Mantic Games was born. Obviously this is a slight diversion, but not only being involved in one startup, I thought, you know what, if you're going to do one, you may as well do 2. And the other thing that's close to my heart is environmental issues and green issues. So we invented a low energy designer light bulb. Hey, there it was. Some of you may have seen those in Costa Coffees. And that was the first low energy designer light bulb. It's called the Plumen. That was quite good fun. I think the next couple of slides talk about the very interesting journey that happens when you get involved in a startup. So 2 companies started both in 2008, 2009. Plumen needed very little funding. We designed the light bulb, had a little bit of money left over from a previous company, and bought 1 container load of them, 20 foot worth of them, put them on the sea, and by the time they'd landed, we'd sold them all. So then we could buy another container. And so it started. That product actually won the Design Product of the Year 2010. If you go to the MoMA Museum in America, it's in there in their permanent collection. And that year it beat the iPad. So this design product, and I think, was part of the first movement towards people's kind of taking care of this planet we live on. Pluma got off to a flying start. Actually, Mantic was the exact opposite. Got off to a slow start. Took quite a lot of funding. We need to start making these plastic tools, and we've got another company in the world doing an absolute monster job of it, dominating the airspace and setting the standards very, very high. We started to get established, and then this thing that hadn't existed came along called Kickstarter, and we were like a rat of a drain pipe. And we started getting involved in that. And that's just about having that ability to stay in the game in those early years until you find an opportunity that gives you a channel or an idea or a license that allows you to move on. And then it went crazy. So here's some turnovers. K means 1,000. M means million, just in case. So Pluma, 2009, did 18,000. That was that first boat that arrived. By 2012, just 3 years later, it was 1.1 million. This is a typo, because I've not checked my own presentation, and that's still 1.1 million. And actually last year it did less than £500,000, because we never found the follow-on product, we never found the breakout product. So it came along, did well, and then faded away. And I'm sure you could think of computer games or other games that come along and do that. And so if you're going to think about something, is there a long-term sustainable model there? That's a 12-year journey from nothing, and it's closing down in the next few months. Or by the end of the month, it's going to be nothing again. Mantic, by 2010, was up to 350,000. By 2012, that's when we found Kickstarter, hit just shy of the million. It climbed up to 2.5 million. It hovered around there in 15, 16, 17, 18. 2019, we had Hellboy. This was a monster Kickstarter for us. It did us over £2 million turnover. And actually, since then, we've done another 2 years of 2.5 million. And that's a good example of that understanding that early on, we can do big licenses, but we've got to be small enough that when we come back down on the other side of it, we've still got a sustainable business model. So what's next? Pluma got to a certain point, hit a glass ceiling, and never quite broke out. Problem with that, when you've got one product, and by this point we tried shades, we tried 4 different Plumans, but nothing quite eclipsed the original product. And new technology came along. If you go into all your coffee shops now, you've got those little low energy LED bulbs, wonderful products, but unprotectable. All they do is just change the piece of glass that's around it and slightly change the color of it. It's nothing protectable. And this month, Pluma will close. But the bulb lives on. We've managed to put it into an LED format. So the previous one was, I can't remember, it's so long ago. But we've got it into an LED format. And there's an existing company that's picked that bulb up and will continue to sell it. And if any of you visit a hotel chain called, it'll come to me, but it's part of the Marriott group, they've just placed an order for £250,000 worth of bulbs to put into their hotels. So it lives on, and it's great as a low energy designer product. Mantic is continuing to grow. And one of the big things that we've used the Kickstarter to allow us to get into more and more small gaming stores and hobby stores. And that core monthly income that you need to pay all the wages of all the people in the warehouse and the sales team and the design team, we're getting closer to that break-even point without Kickstarter. We're not there yet, but we're getting closer. And we're taking off really, really well in the USA. We're going to be having we've just employed a full-time French member of staff. We've got some French products coming out. 2 of them are coming out this year. And one of our next areas of focus is going to be Europe. While we've been dealing with them, it's been largely English language or distribution from some others. We've got some more Kickstarters. We could do a Q&A later on which licenses we've got. see. And hopefully it grows from there. Hopefully when you, the next generation, when you'll think about what games night will we play, you'll be picking up and going, 40k, let's play a Mantic game. So these are some of the products we have, all the way from fantasy war games through to the Umbrella Academy, which some of you may have seen on Netflix. It's all right, no problem. Just missed it. We'll have to start again, everybody. You're all right with that, aren't you?
We can all remember it.
Yeah. There we go. Zappy things. So these are some of the licenses that we're picking up, working generally with the comics, of which the Netflix series is based on. Bonus question. Come on, we'll just go back. Can anyone tell me who wrote the Umbrella Academy and which band they're in? Pardon? It is My Chemical Romance. Well done. Do you want another zombie? Well, hey, you're winning all of my walkers. Check, that's a different one than the first one you've got. Yeah. There's prizes. So you latecomers, you've got to get in the game quick, otherwise you're going to be home empty-handed. So those are some of the products we've got coming out, and some of the mainstays of our business. And I think on Thursday there's some kind of conference gaming expo thing. So if you want to play any of our games or some of our games, we've got them down in the expo on Thursday. I'm not here, but Matt and some of the other guys from the team are. Let's keep going. And there we go. So, brief run through, my journey and the journey of Mantic Games. Sorry, you did literally arrive just in time for the end. But if you want to stay at the end, we can do it all again. It's no problem. Or you can watch it online. We'll do some Q&A, and if you've not got any, I've got a few questions that I can talk you through some of the game design decisions, for example, that we made when we're designing these kind of games. I just didn't know who and what the audience is going to be. Does anyone have any questions? Okay, so how's my experience? Yeah. So the question was, how's my experience at Games Workshop? When I joined in '92, and that was following on from my hobby time, the '90s was great fun. It was a small company. It was very friendly. It was growing. It was exciting. Things were changing. And that was true I'd say, for about 13 of my 15 years. Towards the end, it was becoming quite corporate. Didn't change. It was the same organization. It was just doing the same old stuff. And then it got a new but it's in terms of what the culture's like. But certainly the idea of me staying in an organization for 10 years doing the same things was mildly my idea of hell. So had a great 13 years and a 2 years that I was quite happy to be ready to leave. And that's often one of the things that at the time, there was no one else in that industry. So it was either set up on your own or leave tabletop gaming. That's changed slightly now, but at the time there was only one game in town, and there's still not many.
Is there any licenses you want to work with in the future?
Yeah, great question. So what licenses do we want to work with? So one of our big coups was The Walking Dead. We picked that up when it was absolutely at its peak, and one of the interesting journeys when you talk to licensing is the first question they ask is, what other licenses do you have? And so until you've got a big license, you can't get any other big licenses. So when Kickstarter came along, fortunately someone came who worked for Tops, who you may have known from Match Attacks, and they had Mars Attacks. And they said, do you want Mars Attacks? And we'd done so well on Kickstarter, I thought, hey, we can do anything, yes. So we did Mars Attacks. It was a great opportunity for our team to learn working with licenses. And unlike other licenses, we got the Kickstarter. We did well on Kickstarter. We made cool lots of little green plastic men. And then we actually paid them the money we owed them, which is quite rare in the licensing world. Quite often companies, particularly small ones, get the license and never actually quite get round to delivering what they promise. We paid them, which meant that when I went and spoke to The Walking Dead over in LA, very glamorous, they would talk to me, and then the guy who I was talking to used to play 40K when he was a kid. So knew about it, realised what I was going to do, and took a chance on us and let us make the plastic games. That went on to do over $1 million between Kickstarter and trade. And from that point onwards, until then, if I went into a licensing meeting, people would say, what license do you have? And I'd say, Mars Attacks. And they'd say, don't sit down, don't take a coffee. But once you said you had The Walking Dead, doors started to open. Because that was a prestigious license, it was right at the peak of its time. That allowed us to then get Hellboy, which was fantastic, and we got that just before the rubbish movie came out. But we got to trade on the 2 previous movies by the Del Toro movies, not Del Toro. Yeah. So that did really, really well, and I said that was an explosion. And that meant that all of a sudden it went from us having to chase licenses to actually people almost wanting us to take their license. What they invariably then do is they say, that's great, you can have our license, can you give us $100,000, please? And that's called your minimum guarantee. And you have to be able to write them a check, so you don't have to think about it. So some of the licenses we've got is Umbrella Academy. We love to do things like Halo. We love to do Call of Duty. We wanted to do Rainbow Six Siege because that was a kind of shooty gun one, but that's gone. So our natural starting place is things with guns, grenades, shooting, robots, lots and lots of dice rolling and war. But actually, as time's gone by, we have started to tap into whole loads of other things. So we're looking at Assassin's Creed, possibly Worms, Streets of Rage. So some of those nostalgia kind of 1980s computer games and little fun, much lighter, much easier, much more kind of disposable popcorn kind of games. So we're kind of being a bit more expansive, but anything that visually looks cool.
How did you find working in the Kickstarter process, being one of the first kind of, when it first started up, what was the process like?
Yeah, well, interestingly, it was really exciting. We just started getting our own release schedule working. And so actually what I did first was just put the products that we had through that channel. And because they'd been designed with toy stores and gaming stores in mind, they both did well on Kickstarter, and then they did well at retail as well, which made me think that I was fantastic and everything we did would be brilliant. And then we started designing for products for Kickstarter, such as Mars Attacks. And anyone that liked Mars Attacks and was affectionate for the IP bought it on Kickstarter because it was a big discount. It looked great. We got close to it. But when you actually put it into stores, people were going, wasn't that a movie 20 years ago? So the big learning with things like, what is the actual best channel to do this product? And how are you going to make sure that if you want it to come out at retail later, you've got a product that's the right price and appropriate for the market that you're putting it out to. So the design process wasn't that different than what we were doing. Certainly in the initial stages. In the second stages, we had to start really thinking about who's going to buy this and when are they going to buy it. Some of the products we've done have had no life after Kickstarter. Others, such as our terrain crate, which is a whole range of terrain for Dungeons and Dragons and war games, have been phenomenally successful and really were designed for the long-term retail. They weren't designed for Kickstarter, but we put them on there because we were going to spend a lot of money tooling them in the initial stages. So that just gave us the funds to tool them. So a little bit also for courses and some of the fun things when you're at the cutting edge of a new platform are questions like, is this funding or is this a sale? Because if it's funding, I don't have to pay VAT. And if it's a sale, I do have to pay VAT. And all of a sudden you have to go and ask expensive accountants, which is it? And then they always say, pay the VAT. So yeah, you end up dealing with challenges and how to recognise the income and some of the things you wouldn't even think about, because when you're at the cutting edge, and just so you know, we were one of the first companies in the UK ever to do a Kickstarter. We might have actually been the first, and that was because at the time it was only in America, and you had to have a national insurance number from someone in America, and we already had an American member of staff, so I borrowed his national insurance number and we took it in dollars, and everything went on from there. Good question. Any more?
The people at the back have asked questions. So, do you want to sort of talk us through how the design process happens? Because I know a lot of these students are going to be doing a game design unit in the next term. Is it kind of you hunt for the license and then design the game based around the license, or does the game design sort of like, do you have like a load of games designs and then go, with that? Or?
Bit of column A, bit of column B. So what happens is we know the type of licenses we want to go for, and then you go to a great big expo and you walk around and you try and set meetings up with them and start having conversations. We've been talking to Call of Duty now for about 4.5 years, 5 years. Twice we've come really close. Came really close to doing a Batman game, which was one of my other hobbies when I was a kid. And just in the last hour, just before they signed, someone else came along and offered 10 times as much money as we had. So we got booted out there. So we know the kind of games that we can make. But what we're finding we're doing is certain conversations you get, no, we haven't got a license in that category, or someone's already signed it. So if you spend a whole load of time designing a game and then the license isn't there, you've wasted a lot of effort. Similarly, if you don't come with some good game designs, you can't start forecasting it. And like I've said, the first thing that the licensing people say is, show me the money. So we start by saying, here's a license, and then we have some back and forth conversations internally about the kind of game we could design, about how much we want to spend tooling the miniatures and tooling the range, designing the range. And then we go back to the licensing company and say, hi, we think this kind of game with this kind of price, this is a sales forecast. Can we pay you once we've done the Kickstarter? And yeah, so with Assassin's Creed, we've been having a long conversation with them about that, because we think it's a cool IP and it could be a good game. But it's starting to get a bit old. The original Ezio has been and done. That's been on Kickstarter and someone's done that game. But there's Valhalla Origins and the other one will come to me in a second. That period's up. But we just don't think there's a war game there. You know, we don't think there's a skirmish game. It's overdoing it. So we've actually designed a kind of time traveling game where you've all got to do your objectives in your own time sphere. And if all three of you do it in all three time spheres, then you know, you kind of win. And it's a cooperative game and it's a family orientated game. And you know, these are slightly different kind of games. But that comes out of a back and forth discussion, because we went back and we said, do you want a raiding game with the Vikings? And we're like, no, you know, they didn't want to do it, we didn't want to do it. So it can be quite iterative. And it's about not over-investing until you really are clear on where you're going to go.
Do you think it's the rule set that sells the game, or the miniatures that sells the game?
I think the intellectual property starts it off, and I think if you're going to have a success, you need to have the gameplay, because I think without the gameplay, it ends up very, very quickly as either on the shelf of shame, or if it's nicely packaged and looks pretty, on your Calyx at the front. You know, like our Hellboy, for example, which was a great game, but you know, if you back that Kickstarter, you truly got a kind of just a joyous box of magnificence. It's the biggest game you've got in your, you know, in your cupboard, and it sits there on your shelf, and you kind of take it out and look at it. But if you don't have any kind of gameplay, and there's a lot of them that are coming to Kickstarter now that don't, it never comes out of that. And one of the things that we've worked really hard at is to not be that. And the great thing is, although this is retiring, and at the end of this month this license ends, the core game design in it, we're going to be reskinning and using in future licenses, because we go, look, it's a wonderful game system. And just, if you're doing this game design, one of the things that we were really conscious about, and we've always talked to our licensors about this, is capturing the essence of the game. And who's seen The Walking Dead back in the early days when the TV series was on? Has anyone watched that? Yeah. And it was petrifying. You know, if you were one of the survivors, and these walkers were coming around, and it was just frightening. So we actually designed the game that instead of it being a normal war game where one group fights another group, you've got each other on either side of the game, you're going to try and achieve the objectives, but the walkers are in between you, and whatever you do will attract their attention. And this was one of the game mechanics that we started working in. It's called noise. If you move, one of them moves towards you. If you shoot your gun, all of them move towards you. And so you start realizing that the best way to kill your opponent is to run behind them, shoot your gun at them, and let all of the zombies run towards the gun. And actually, because they'll interact with the other player before they interact with your player, the zombies eat your enemy for you. And it took quite a long time to design that, but that's where you're thinking about what is it in this license that makes what we're doing here fun. Another good one is, if you haven't seen it, you won't know, but Negan is the big main bad guy. That's why his name's on the front. Here's Negan. And we realised that, who's seen Reservoir Dogs? Come on. Okay. We realised everyone would want to be Negan because he's the coolest. And so actually in the Here's Negan game, you can play everybody except Negan. Negan actually is the clock. Negan walks along in his turn, hits you if you're not walking fast enough, gets cross with you and shouts at you, and you have a card deck to play Negan, and the rest of you all play his cronies who are trying to achieve the mission. And so that's another example of the game design where we've taken out the coolest character, because then you can play the game, otherwise it'd upset the game balance and so on and so forth. And so those are some of the things that, whether it's computer games or whether it's board games, you've got to really think about what is it you're trying to create as an emotion in the people playing your game. Fear or humour or a bit of both. Can anyone name any of Negan's gang? Because if you can have the figure on.
There is some on the online questions. How do you keep updating a game to keep it relevant without upsetting the current audience?
There are some questions on.
Okay, I wondered if there was, but I'm glad you checked up. Okay, so the question was, how do we keep games updated without upsetting the current audience? Yep. Interesting challenge. And obviously one of those things that in computer games is that easy, because you just, overnight, time to download and update, and off they go. A little bit harder. So there's two ways we do it. We have an errata and an FAQ that comes out usually a few weeks after we've launched a book, which puts right all of the mistakes we've made. Usually we don't make many mistakes, but there will be questions of clarity. So people will read it and interpret it two different ways. And so one of the things, and if you think of a game of chess, if people are reading how those things move or take in a different way, it will be a big confrontation, a big problem. So we'll put the FAQ up and do it there. And then the bigger the game, so that Kings of War game, for example, which has hundreds of, 20 different armies and 30 different army slots in each one. So if you think of a chessboard, instead of just having 6 different pieces in a variety of places, there's literally hundreds on a board that changes every time. So the interpretation of those rules is the difference between winning and losing. We will often put a book out once a year and ask people to pay to keep the game system updated. And so the bigger, the more living the game is, the more willing people are to pay for that DLC. And with each time, we're both trying to update the rules and give them new content. And so, yet again, we're stealing off the computer game industry and trying to apply it to the tabletop industry.
Do you think that model of the subscription thing would work in the same way, so that you would pay, a yearly subscription and just get completely updated?
Yeah, I do. I think it's something we're looking at. I think there's a number of things that you just subscribe for and say, I just want the latest edition of it. I think there's also the admin that comes with designing your army. If you can just click on your phone or on your PC and get your army list updated. People already pay us for the updated army lists, and then if you paid for the premium service, that comes with all the updated rules. So you don't actually need to buy the book. They often will because I want to read about it, but actually with the premium service, that new rule that's in there will be explained. With the free one, it just says, yeah, you've got that blip, but it doesn't explain what the blip is. So you need to buy the book. So, yeah, I think the subscription could be a big part of the answer if we can make it work.
There's one more. What would you say is the most important thing when starting a business?
Either need no money or have lots of money. By need no money, it means if you're young and you don't have people dependent on you, you can take some risks. And I think the thing about starting a business is you've got to be resilient. You're going to have to go at it. Unless you are Mark Zuckerberg, you're not going to get it right first time. And everybody that I talked to, it took longer, it was harder, it was more challenging. And so some part of me says, do it when you're young because, it's a great and it's an exciting part of life's journey. Interestingly, I don't think I'd have been able to do Mantic if I hadn't been the age I was without the experience that I had. Because by then I'd worked in sales, I'd worked in the marketing, I'd worked in licensing, I'd been to America, I'd seen the different markets. But of course the problem there was I had, a life to keep going. And that meant there was a different pressure on that resilience, and when it didn't take off, that was a real challenge. And hence the raising of money and being able to fortunately access funding. I think the great thing about Kickstarter and other crowdfunding and the world that you're entering is people are, and by that I mean angel investors and crowdfunding, they're far more willing to back visions that people have. That said, you're still going to need that resilience. You're going to need that adaptability. You're going to need to be ready to pivot, is what I think they call it.
Tied into that, when you had the Hellboy success, because it was huge, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Was it over 1 million?
1.4 million on Kickstarter, and then another 600,000 at trade.
Yeah. So logistically, how do you deal with fulfilling that many orders? Because that's where a lot of Kickstarters come unstuck, isn't it? You have so many of them where they've been successful and they've been backed, but then actually when they realise how much it's going to cost to ship, how much it's going to cost to produce,
Yeah.
the things, there's been so many failures because of that. How did you handle that?
By that point, we knew our business model, and we pretty well knew. But actually, interestingly, sometimes a lot of success too early can kill you, not carry you forward. And one of the challenges I saw in the early days of Kickstarter is people would go out and raise £80,000 on a Kickstarter, and that was more product than they'd ever sold. They had a little small business, and they'd come to me and they'd say, "Hey, Ron, can you help me here?" And you'd go, "Yeah, give everyone their money back, because you promised £80,000 worth of tooling. Never mind £80,000 worth of product and £80,000 worth of game design and sculpting." And so people are often bankrupt the day after they finish their Kickstarter. And that's why you're seeing numbers of big companies now coming in, cool money or not, doing £6 million. They'll have spent a colossal amount tooling those, but they know their business model, they understand it, and they just know that they can cover the tooling costs. And so when we go into a Kickstarter, we know our tooling cost, we know our expected gross margin, and invariably, I've seen some companies where they've got it made, it's sat in China, but because they've been spending some of that money, because when you look at your bank account and think, I've got £1 million there, yeah, you haven't. You've got maybe 100 grand, because the first 500,000 is for the cost of the goods, and 150,000 of it is going to cost to ship it. 150 grand is going to cost to make it. So maybe you've got £100,000 left, and then it's going to take you 2 years to deliver it. So what do you want as a salary? Okay. So, then it gets to China, they've paid the first half, and then they can't pay to get it out of China. Or they get it over to the warehouse and they can't pay the shipping company to ship it. And just for an example of what can happen between you doing the Kickstarter and delivering it, pre-pandemic, a 40-foot container filled with games would cost me £1,500 to have it on a boat delivered from China to the UK or to the US. And on that, I could get, several thousand games. So 50p per game. That same £1,500 container now costs £11,000. 6 times the amount. And if your margins were tight beforehand, and you have to do that for 6 containers, and it's an extra £10,000, that's £60,000 just to get it from China to here. Same has happened to get it from here to the front door. So businesses change. And it's one of those, just when you think you've got it down pat, something comes along and messes with you. And it comes back to that first question, that resilience, that ability to pivot. And don't bet the farm on any one project. Make sure you can go again.
Here's one more online question. Are there any difficulties with designing the miniatures for a game with an existing IP? And if so, how do you avoid them?
So the question was, is there any challenges designing miniatures for an existing IP?
Correct.
Yeah. So for example, what will happen with, this is Negan and his gang, and what we were sculpting from was the art, because we had the comic license. And there's whole piles of joyous stories. For example, the person that drew the first few comics for The Walking Dead left, and then Charlie Adlard drew all the rest. And we weren't allowed to use any of the art in the first few comics because our license was with, Robert and Charlie. Over this period, unfortunately, some of the characters that we needed to sculpt were already dead by the time that Charlie started drawing them. So how do you go and draw something that doesn't exist? So sometimes they would occasionally let us draw that person for the card, and then we could sculpt them. The other thing is, fortunately, we were going off a comic. So we just went to my contact. They would look at the miniatures. They would look at them on a screen, on their computer. So they'd be this big, and they'd say, I'm not sure about their belt buckle. I think their belt buckle was slightly different. And as you can see, when you get them down to this size and in plastic, you can't really see the belt buckle. So you'll have all of these kind of sign-offs, but eventually you go, you can't see the belt buckle, just sign it off. That's not the worst. When you start sculpting for things like the Lord of the Rings movies, as Games Workshop was, and they're sculpting Liv Tyler and Gandalf. Who was Gandalf? Ian McKellen. They have the rights to sign off their own images. So if he doesn't like the way the hat's crooked, no, Gandalf's hat's a bit more bent than that. Liv Tyler didn't like the size of her feet. And 3 times sent it back and said, they're not my feet. So yeah, you have some great stories, and usually some of the great battle stories that you get, or when you're trying to get likenesses signed off. And there's whole loads of great war stories in that area.
Do you think it gives you more freedom, like with Kings of War, where you're developing your own IP effectively there, aren't you? Is that
Oh, the long-term advantages are huge, you know, to the point that one day, you know, we might be able to license it out to make a game of it. So, you know, what became an IP becomes a game again, it goes full circular. I mean, that's a long way in the future, but what's great is if we think, oh, that's a bit unbalanced, how do we change it? Or, you know what, wouldn't that be cool? Well, we make it. What you don't get is any kind of license recognition that you get when you get a licensed game. So you're straight away saying, hey, try this game, it's really great, it's really good fun. People go, oh, I'm already playing games, I've got lots of games, thanks very much. And so, as with all these, there's pros and cons to everything. The creative freedom you get with your own IP is brilliant, but there's no recognition, and it takes years, and it's getting harder to get that breakout product. And something on the other side, you get this. And one of the great things about Walking Dead, for example, was just how big the license was. You know, there's Rick, when he's with his Atlanta team, they meet the governor, they meet Negan, they meet the Whisperers, they meet the Kingdom. So for a war game, there's whole different factions to fight against. Most IPs have goodies and baddies. And therefore, you've got two factions. Hellboy, there's Hellboy, and then there's the thing he fights against. And who doesn't want to play Hellboy?
How do you feel about community stuff? Because I think it's interesting in video games, because esports particularly is obviously grown immensely. We've just started doing esports courses here. But that community's been around in tabletop games and card games particularly for a very long time, hasn't it? And the idea of competitive play has always been there. Do you see that going in a different direction now? Or?
Yeah, I mean, interesting. One of the reasons why Kings of War is successful is our community. When Warhammer Old World ended, actually, lock, stock and barrel, we picked up several countries, certain parts of the US, certain parts of the UK, just flipped over from that game to our game. And from the back of that, that gave us a platform for the game to become more widely accessible. Community is enormous. And I think when you're paying for an IP, what you're essentially buying is their community. And therefore, the people that have looked after their community and interact with their community is a far more valuable asset than those that haven't looked after them. And one of the things we spend a lot of time doing is trying to work with our fans, and we have rules committees that write our products for us because they're actually playing it and they're actively participating in it. So it seems like play testers online. We have the same people doing that for our war games. And some of the games that we have that are written by fans. We've probably written I don't particularly like sci-fi games, but I love Dead Zone because visually it's like a small cinema set up. The way we've designed the game, it's very thematic and very cinematic. And then I've always had a bit of a fetish for dwarves. So my fantasy dwarves are the only army I've ever got round to painting. But yeah.
I really like what you've done with the Mantic halfling, actually. It's quite an interesting take on halflings.
Yeah, I mean, we're getting a bit geeky out here, man. I've let these guys go, but yeah, that was a classic example where we wanted to take a classic, trope that'd been in the movies. They're absolutely central to the Lord of the Rings movies, and then put our own army on them because I think in the past they've always been slightly comedic, and we wanted to move away from that while still staying true to the classic trope of a halfling, and we keep doing that, and that's kind of our direction. So you recognise it, but it'll be different.
Has anyone else got any questions?
Oops, done that twice. We all good?
Yeah, I think so.
All right, thanks everybody. Thanks for being patient with us.